Good morning, good afternoon, besties. Hey, you guys. What's up? It's your boy, Mix Mercury, the Astro Himbo. And we are here today for a little transit chat. How are you guys? Feeling real sluggish. I see two besties in the chat. Good morning to Carrington. I'm just gonna say good morning until it's well, I guess it's technically afternoon, but whatever. Good afternoon from Texas. Good morning, Dr. Deb. Feeling real sluggish? Yes, I agree. Feeling a little like my brain still needs to come online a bit. I don't have something specific to talk about like I thought I would. I was doing a little scrolling last night and thought that I had a clear idea of what I would talk about, or at least that I would have come up with a more clear idea of what I wanted to talk about. But I think today's going to be a pull cards day and me just letting you know what transits are coming up to be aware of and pay attention to. And just a little bit of an astro pattern that I'm seeing. That's really all I have as far as notes go. What it all means, I will let the cards give us some insight into that. I think part of the reason that I don't have a specific idea of what's coming is because it's coming. You know, it's this is all kind of in the future type stuff. And we're post eclipse reorienting at the moment. And then we're about to go through a lot of shifts. So I'm going to give you guys a heads up on those shifts and then we're going to see what the cards have to say about that. Anything else? Anything else? Yeah, so I'll just let y'all pull up for a moment. Good morning, Lo. Hi, Heart. Yeah, I was up till 2:30 last night listening to music. Just listening to music. I had a little bit of caffeine, light caffeine late in the day, and then it just kept me awake. So. Feeling very sleepy, but in a good way, except that I can't sleep because I'm at work. Oh, no. No work, just sleep. Everybody rest. Let me make sure Okay, I do have the right microphone on. I wasn't sure for a second. All right, so let's talk about upcoming transits and what we're looking at. So, broad terms before I list off these dates, Mercury retrograde season is upon us. I know we've been through so much, and when do we get a break? This is life. Life is not about breaks. Life is about things happening constantly. So, yes, Mercury retrograde season will unofficially begin this, I think it's Wednesday or Thursday, whenever the second is. And I say unofficially because this is one of those retrogrades that's between two signs. It's going to be between Libra and Scorpio. So, it's going to be late degrees Libra, which means even though Mercury will be in the sign that it will eventually station direct. So, it's going to be in the sign where Mercury retrograde will end in Libra. That technically means that's when Mercury retrograde season starts, because those themes start coming into play as soon as Mercury enters the sign where it's going to do its little retrograde dance. I believe it's 26 degrees Libra that we're looking for as far as where Mercury is going to eventually station direct, but it will station retrograde officially in Scorpio. I think around 12 degrees Scorpio. So yeah, once Mercury moves into that sign, those themes come into the picture. And I let you know in advance in this way as a courtesy, because if I were to wait until Mercury gets all the way to Scorpio 12 degrees and stations retrograde, all of the things you would have needed to be tuned into would have already passed. So you'd have to retroactively think what's been going on the last few weeks during the pre-shadow, da 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 da. Save yourself the trouble. Just start thinking about it as soon as Mercury enters that sign. So when you start having conversations about those themes, even if you're not fully aware of all of the elements of those conversations, you'll at least know what time periods to refer to and just when to pay a little bit more attention about the conversations that you're having. So, my little pro tip. Yeah, Mercury will enter Libra on October 2nd. And from there, I'm just going to list out some dates and I'll go back and kind of explain why these are dates that I've pointed out. If you have the 2025 sidereal iCals in your calendar, or if you want to write these down, you can. And I will tell you why they are relevant. So, in order, starting with, like I said, Mercury enters Libra on October 2nd. And then Venus enters Virgo on October 9th. So we want to know where Venus is while Mercury and planets are moving through Libra, because Venus is the planet that rules that sign. Mercury is still in Leo. Venus is still in Leo currently. So Venus is in Leo until October 9th. Then Venus will move into Virgo. Just before Venus moves into Virgo, Jupiter will enter Cancer on after Venus enters Virgo, Jupiter will enter Cancer on October 18th. So, Jupiter's going to station retrograde at 0 degrees Cancer. Just something to keep in mind. I'll tell you why later. Mercury will conjoin Mars. So Mercury and Mars will kiss in the sign of Libra on October 20th. And then Venus will enter Libra on November 2nd. After Venus enters Libra, Mercury will retrograde into Scorpio. Wait, what? Mercury will enter Scorpio, excuse me. Wait, what? Hold on, did I write that down wrong? Okay, Mercury enters Scorpio on October 29th. So I wrote that down wrong. Mercury enters Scorpio October 29th. And then Mercury will station retrograde in Scorpio on November 9th. In the meantime, Venus will enter Scorpio on. Hold on. The way I wrote this down is confusing. I'm so sorry. Mercury retrogrades in Scorpio on November 9th. Then Jupiter retrogrades in Cancer on November 11th. So 11/11, Jupiter retrograde. Mercury retrograde will conjoin Mars again. So they'll kiss, but Mercury moving backwards in Scorpio on November 12th. And then Mercury will move back into Libra on 11/23, November 23rd. Then Venus enters Scorpio on November 26th. Saturn will station direct on November 28th. Mercury will also station direct on November 29th. And then Mercury will enter Scorpio on December 6th and will officially be out of retrograde territory and signs and everything by December 29th. So we're basically going to be in some version of Mercury retrograde oriented conversations until December 29th. So the rest of the year. Long pause just for us to pour one out for whoever. Yeah. Mercury retrograde season until the end of the year, basically. So enjoy. But yeah, Mercury retrograde dates, I'll say one more time. Mercury will station retrograde in Scorpio on November 9th. And then Mercury will station direct in Libra on November 29th. Then Mercury will move through Scorpio on December 6th through December 29th. So all while that's happening, Venus will move through Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio. I should have written down when Mars will move through, but let's just worry about maybe Mercury. I thought we were going to talk about, I was going to try to add Venus into the fold, but I'm not going to do that. We'll just talk about Mercury and Jupiter a little bit for the sake of this conversation, and we'll add in layers as we go on. Now, the reason I brought up Jupiter retrograde into the fold is because, as you know, Jupiter's been in Gemini most of the year. And this brief retrograde period in Cancer kind of mirrors both the Mars and Mercury retrogrades between Gemini and Cancer too. So this is kind of familiar. The reason I wanted to talk about Jupiter in Cancer along with these Libra transits and Mercury retrograde in Libra is because I think Cancer and Libra have an interesting relationship to each other. And these are some of the things I was looking at when I was on Instagram last night that were starting to kind of whisper to me, but it's not super clear yet. And it's the way that Libra, the sign Libra being an air sign, air cardinal, Venus ruled sign, has a resistant relationship to Cancer, which is a water cardinal sign. And I see y'all coming into the chat. Hello, hello. Welcome in. So yeah, Libra resists Cancer. And I think this is interesting because if we're talking about Mars in Libra in particular right now, Mars is sort of setting the stage for things that Mercury retrograde is going to come through and talk about. And Mars in Libra is Mars in detriment, I believe, or just Mars. Mars is in a position where it doesn't want to be. Mars is in a sign opposite one of its homes, and one of its homes being Aries. Mars is also in the 12th house from its other home, Scorpio, which Libra is in the 12th house, or the sign before Scorpio. So Mars is in a weird position when it's in Libra, and it's both in a position where it can't dominate the body the way that Aries does. Aries can impose itself on Cancer in the same way that we can dominate and control or push our body to do things beyond what it feels like doing. That's very much like an Aries quality or capability or a skill that Mars can use. And then there are times that Mars likes to center and be motivated by its feelings in its body through being in Scorpio. But in Libra, it can't do either of those things. It has to behave like Venus. And it, ironically, I think something that came to me earlier is that when planets are in fall, well, no, not in fall, when planets are in detriment, when they are in the sign opposite their home sign, I feel like they actually take on like a shadow quality. Like when we talk about shadow work and this idea of disowning um character traits or whatever in yourself that you don't want to be or that you're trying to avoid, having a planet in detriment kind of does that because it is behaving in an opposite way that it would usually like to behave. And yeah, it ends up kind of doing the exact thing that I think it's trying to avoid. Um so I don't know if I can find a way to explain that today I will, but stay with me here. Yeah. So when I talk about Libra resisting Cancer, what I mean is because it's an air sign, it would chooses to behave in the logical and the rational and the intellectual space. It likes to verbalize things and use words and language and the imagination and concepts, but really these kind of abstract qualities and rationalizations in order to do what it needs to do. Whereas water signs, like Cancer especially, are very much motivated by how they feel and vote and motivated by what's going on in your body, whether that's a physical experience of discomfort or pleasure or desire or emotions like joy or happiness or anger or frustration, whatever it is. Like planets in water want to do something with that emotion, whereas planets in air would like to think about the experience that they're having more than feel into it. So Libra, to me, is the part of us and all of us, right? You don't have to have Libra placements to have this experience, but Libra is the part of us that tries to see all sides and all perspectives of a situation or a conflict and tries to consider not just possible outcomes, but also other people's perspective and experience, and kind of putting yourself in other people's shoes. All air signs have their own ways of doing this, but I think for Libra, it very much is relational. It's very much, I wonder what this person is thinking, what it's like to be this other person. It has a way of having compassion and empathy in the intellectual way, or in the rationalizing or justifying other people's actions kind of way. And so in order to do that, in order to take that quote rational uh abstract perspective or whatever perception of what somebody else may be thinking or feeling, Libra has to separate itself from its own feelings, right? It has to be able to objectify its own feelings and say, okay, I can see this is how I feel. And again, it goes from being an embodied experience to an intellectual experience or a mental experience. It's like, I know I'm having the experience that I'm having, but I really want to know what this other person is experiencing, or I want to consider the impact that my actions might have on this other person, or I'm trying to think about how the other person is thinking or feeling or what the other person needs, or there's just a way of centering the experiences of others around you instead of centering your own experience, which has its perks. It's great especially for things like um trying to be considerate of everybody else involved and trying to also avoid punishment. It has this ability to kind of see into the future and to anticipate certain outcomes in a way similar to Virgo, but it's more imaginative than it is cause and effect, if that makes sense. So I think water signs and Cancer in particular can be a little bit more self-centric. And that's not to say like egotistical. I just mean like your feelings are so loud that you feel them before you consider somebody else's feelings, right? And that's just being a person. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you've grown up in environments where it was vital to your survival or to you getting your needs met or to feeling safe and connected to those relationships, prioritizing other people's feelings and needs and perspectives can benefit you in that environment in a big way. Um, Sometimes that can look like being a people pleaser, whatever. It can look like being a caretaker. It can be like look like being the person who has to kind of keep everybody together or bring both sides of people together because you can see both sides of the argument. Playing a bit of a peacemaker role comes up a lot. Being a mediator comes up a lot. So there's a lot of power with that placement. Ultimately, when we're talking about both Cancer and Libra, the reason this comes up is because we're talking about control. And a lot of times, I think for Libra, having control over some aspect of the relationship is the purpose of being able to see all sides and all perspectives and find the commonalities between what I think and feel and what you think and feel. Or at the very least, trying to make sure the other person is happy so that I don't end up in a situation or so that I don't end up in trouble or so that whatever. So when we talk about then Libra just as a concept, as a if we're talking about Libra as an experience and how it resists Cancer, there's what comes to mind is the feeling of wanting to avoid discomfort, wanting to avoid punishment, and wanting to avoid consequences for your actions. Yes, that can mean trying to evade accountability, but I think in this particular context, I mean wanting to avoid discomfort as in um shame can be one version of it, wanting to avoid the discomfort of disappointing other people, wanting to avoid the discomfort of your own feelings. And really, I think that's what I want to focus on is trying to avoid the discomfort of your own feelings. I think all cardinal signs do this in their own ways because they all have a relationship to the sign Cancer, and the sign Cancer itself even behaves the way it does because it's trying to deal with its feelings, right? Trying to manage its own feelings or feel a sense of control over its own feelings and bodies. And so when Libra is trying to maintain control over a situation, it does so by remaining composed, by remaining at least appearing to be calm, cool, and collected, um, but mostly appearing to be rational and considerate. And in order to be, quote, rational and considerate, especially like in the colonial sense where feelings are seen as irrational in the derogatory sense or illogical or just something to be dismissed, Libra comes through and says, cool, if I remain composed and if I can remain rational and composed, I can get my needs met. So I need to not crash out. I need to not full on attack other people, or in some ways it can even look like just struggling to stand up for yourself and advocate for your perspective, because it benefits you more to understand the other person's perspective or rationale for something and kind of adjust to the situation according to that, because that's the person with more perceived power. Remember, a lot of stuff with Libra and Aries has to do with power struggles and power dynamics relationally, and just with respect to like laws and rules and things like that. Because the whole purpose of a rule is not how you feel about the rule, but the intention of the rule is usually to control a society, control a population. Sometimes that's a good thing. It keeps us from killing each other. And sometimes it's a bad thing, and where it manipulates us into behaving in ways that we otherwise wouldn't behave. So I'm going to pause there, see what y'all are saying, because I see a lot of activity in the chat. Love it here. Hey, April. Hey, Sloan. Hey, Bonnie. I have Mars in Libra, and I remember an astrologer I know. I Mars in Libra, and I remember an astrologer that I no longer watch said we like to dress up and look very Venus before we act. That's a good way to put it. Yes. Um. Yeah, my previous mentor, Dana, used to talk about or used to talk about the difference between like Mars and Aries versus Mars and Libra. Would be Mars and Aries is like gonna bust into the burning building just through the front door and grab somebody and take them out, whereas Mars and Libra is gonna sit and consider all of the different ways, sneak in through the back door, sneak in through in a way that requires a little bit more strategy. You can't just bust in and do what you want to do off of the pure strength of will and brute force, right? Sometimes you gotta play chess, right? Not checkers. Libra is very chess to me. If you've ever played the game of chess, you have to be strategic. Just moving off of impulse sometimes will end up getting all of your men taken. But if you can plan ahead and not just see the next move you need to make, but to see the next 3 or 4 moves ahead of you, and have a larger plan where you're trying to remain in control over your gameplay and get the other person to move in a way that is dependent on how you move, right? Or you moving in a way that's dependent on what you're expecting from the other person. It can go either way. But that foresight and the ability to imagine into the future is the air quality that Libra has that works really well. Because Libra knows basically that, like, okay, I'll say for Mars and Libra, since Mars is usually about movement and taking action and control, Mars and Libra knows that they can move in ways that will get other people to move in other ways, right? Libra knows, okay, I know this other person well enough that if I move left, they're going to move right. So if I want them to move left, I need to move right. Or if I want them to move right, if I want them to move left, then I need to move right. It's that kind of a thing. Um, it's knowing it's knowing the other person well enough to know how they're going to respond, and then you moving in a way that's going to get them to respond that way. I hope that makes sense. It feels like I need a more concrete example of that, but I mean, that's basically how laws work. I feel like um the whole purpose of a speed limit is to get you to drive in a way that's safe enough for everybody else to also be on the road with you. So you can go 100 miles into 75. There are consequences for that. It's either you getting a ticket or you wrecking into somebody else, right? That's kind of the recklessness of Aries saying like, okay, I'm going to go fast because I want to go fast and I can, and everybody else get out the way. But also Libra says, okay, well, there's consequences for that. So if I know that I will be punished for driving over the speed limit, I'm either going to drive under the speed limit, or I'm going to be real strategic about the moments where I speed. And I'm going to make sure that I can see hundreds of miles out in front of me, so that if there's a cop waiting for me, I can slow down in time to not get caught. Or maybe I'll drive 5 miles over the speed limit so that I'm still going faster, but I'm not going so obviously faster that I'm going to get pulled over, because with respect to everybody else, I look like I'm flying through traffic, right? Things like that. Aries, I mean, well, yeah. Libra. Libra knows kind of when to hold and when to fold, basically. I've never felt having Moon and Mars both in Cancer more than recently, trying to deal with my crazy ass mother. Yeah, that'll do it. Can confirm as a Libra rising, living in fawn response, eldest daughter, yes. Clock my T. Wow, yeah. In my work, we call it being a solid object in crises, but it definitely is applicable elsewhere. That's also very true. Yes. Um, being a solid object for sure. As an Aquarius Leo rising with both Moon and Mars and Cancer, I find it feels annoying and hard to manage, especially when I want to flatten someone. Damn, I said this is chestnut checkers this week and it's my Mars return. Yeah. The description you're giving is so me, LMAO. I love planning 5 steps in advance and playing simulations in my head. Yes. Every single possibility becomes a consideration in how I move. Yes. I made a grand plan just to befriend a local queer masker in my area, and it's my Mars return. Yep. My ADHD ass usually wants to just flip the board. So true. As a Mars and Libra, as a Mars and Gemini, I'm taking notes from y'all Mars and Libra folks. Okay, cool. So it seems like everybody is basically understanding. Um, so what I think Mars specifically in Libra is doing right now is shaking things up as Mars does in terms of the ways that we use language or the ways that we manipulate language in order to move in ways or to motivate people in ways that we would like, something like that. And the shadowy aspect of Mars and Libra versus Mars at home in Aries to me is that, again, Mars and Aries, though it does have kind of this bull in a china shop way about it, where it's just like this kind of fuck around and find out type of energy. Mars and Aries still can accept that it's disruptive, right? Mars and Aries knows, okay, well, people aren't going to like me. I'm going to be abrasive. Like, I don't really give a fuck. I know who I am. I'm going to do what I want to do. And like, just like kind of does what they want to do. And it's not that they don't give a fuck about how other people, it's not that they don't give a fuck about their impact on other people. It's that they know they have an impact on other people and use that to their advantage, right? They know that they can take up space in the world, and if they move how they want, they'll get what they want. So they just do it, right? They're very Nike, just do it. Mars and Aries. But Mars and Libra doesn't, for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, but because of how Mars and Libra grew up, they weren't allowed to do that. They weren't allowed to just speak up and be bold and take bold actions and just like, you know, strength of will and brute force their way through life, because usually somebody that they were dependent on weaponized their power against them or had to dismiss their power and capability to keep them under their control or under their thumb. Sometimes there was abuse going on where you didn't really have a voice in that way. There's plenty of reasons why Mars and Libra is like, I need to do what I need to do, but I need to keep the peace first and foremost. If I cannot keep the peace somehow, I will not be safe. So I can't just be a bull in a china shop like Mars and Aries, or I will destroy everything. And the irony of that is, for Mars and Libra, I think the desire to be the bull in the china shop still exists, and like reclaiming that, I think, can only make you more strategic, but in a almost like in a more attuned, like self-attuned way or something like that. So I don't know. I'm gonna have to think on that a little bit longer, or maybe it'll reveal itself when I pull cards in a little bit. But that's part one of what I'm thinking about, just as far as what Mars and Libra is doing. And then there's the whole Libra Cancer thing where Mars and Aries can overpower the body because Aries imposes itself on Cancer, right? So what I mean by that is, for example, if you were an athlete in high school, and you tweaked your ankle, The wise thing to do would be to sit down and stop playing, you know? But with Aries, if it's not so bad that you're completely disabled by it, right? You can still walk, you can still run, it just hurts a little bit, you will stay in the game. Um, Especially if your coach is demanding that you do it. So there's a way of actually, I take that last part back. Yes. The Aries Cancer square is saying like I tweaked my ankle a little bit, but I can still run, so I'm still going to play. I will push myself past my limit in that sense. It's also like when you're working out and your lungs are starting to burn from running or whatever, but you keep running anyway. You're just like pushing past the pain and overcoming, kind of pushing past your limits in that way. Sometimes that's great because sometimes you do need to push yourself outside of your comfort zone a little bit to grow and get stronger. You know, sometimes you got to lift weights. Actually, lifting weights is probably the best example. Me just giving a bunch of examples, but lifting weights is probably the best example of Aries imposing itself on Cancer, because yes, lifting weights is a struggle and it hurts. You can be very sore for days, but ultimately if you keep doing it within, you know, a certain level of limits, but you push past just your limits just a little bit, you will get stronger over time. So there's that. On the flip side, Libra and Cancer is like dissociating from the pain completely. So if I go back to the example of tweaking your ankle but still playing in the game because your coach is yelling at you to play versus you sitting out because your ankle hurts, and it would be more beneficial for you to acknowledge the pain and feel it than it would be to dissociate from it. Well, um one, you have pressure on you to continue doing this action that hurts you, but two, um if you were to complain and vocalize your pain, it wouldn't be taken seriously. Or the coach would, it would change your coach's perception of you. You might be seen as weak, or you might be seen as, I don't know, a crybaby or whatever. And so to avoid that, Mars and Libra is like, okay, I can't let them know that this hurts like fuck. So whenever I go out into the game, maybe I don't run after every single ball, but I'm going to pick and choose which ball I run after, because I know that my ankle hurts, but I know I also want this coach's approval. So I'm going to go hard in the moments that it makes sense to go hard, and I'm going to pull back on some of the ways that it hurts too much to do that. I'm going to find another way to get this job done. So that's kind of the difference. And the relationship to Cancer that I'm making here is just that, yeah, sometimes you do end up dismissing your own pain in service of keeping the peace, or sometimes you do dismiss your own pain in service of maintaining a certain perception, or yeah, maintaining a certain perception of or image of yourself. And sometimes, like for example, the Big Brother finale is tonight. Sometimes you just can't let everyone know exactly what it is that you're up to and exactly how you feel about them or about the situation that you're in, because it's just simply safer to do so. And um I think in some ways that can feel like a version of like self-abandonment or a struggle to stay embodied and connected to your pain and your discomfort and feelings of being dysregulated, and it can also help you survive during really dysregulating times. So, I guess I say all of that to say, when Mercury is moving through not just Libra, or well, I'll say it like this: when Mercury is moving through Libra while Jupiter is in Cancer, because that's going to happen here pretty soon, I think there will be a lot of us concealing the truth of how we feel emotionally, physically, whatever it is, in service of maintaining a certain appearance, maintaining certain relationships, maintaining the peace or a sense of harmony or whatever it is. There'll be some level of concealing um verbally in conversations, maybe, or finding, okay, there's the one side of it being concealing the truth of how we really feel. The other side of it is also finding better ways to talk about how we feel that don't set off other people's alarm systems internally. What I mean by that, actually, that's fucking deep now that I'm saying it out loud. Mm, getting downloads in real time is always so interesting. Yeah, so um feeling a lot of that energy now. Yeah, because Mars already in Libra. Yeah. Mercury being real without tripping alarms. I'm gonna put that up because that's exactly it. So what Mercury does in transit, and especially in transit next to other planets, is it amplifies. You start having conversations about it. If the sun isn't there just yet, you're having the conversation, but you're not exactly connecting the dots just yet. There's just conversations that are happening and they're not like fully conscious conversations yet. You're kind of speaking from a place that is maybe subconscious or unconscious. Um you're speaking from a place where you're saying things and everybody's listening and the conversation's happening, but it's not fully like clicking in this fully like self-aware type of way until the sun gets there. So for until the sun enters, I don't remember when the sun enters Libra, but until the sun enters Libra, I think we'll be having these conversations where it's like people are potentially talking around, yes, nebulous and formless. People are talking around maybe the exact thing that they would want to say, right? There's being direct and speaking directly on an experience that you're having and how you feel about it, because of the feelings part of this is what's specific because of Jupiter in Cancer and even because of Saturn in Pisces. There's the water going on and whatever. So the Libra of it all is maybe you're not speaking directly to your feelings in a moment or your body, the physical experience that you're having in a moment. You're talking around it. You're finding a more strategic way to talk about the experience you're having without getting into the feelings of it all and without triggering somebody else's feelings, right? Finding more palatable ways to speak about something. And then Mercury's going to enter Scorpio. And you guys know what happens when planets enter Scorpio. Shit gets real. And when I say shit gets real, it's that those feelings that you are trying to kind of talk around during Libra transits become too obvious to dismiss and to ignore. And they take up space in the room. But instead of people just immediately talking about, like, oh, wow, you're feeling grief, you're feeling anger, you're feeling betrayed, whatever it is. Instead, what people usually do during Scorpio transits is they villainize the person who are having the taboo feelings, or they villainize and scapegoat the person with an identity that is controversial or taboo in society right now. And they say, oh, you're feeling that way because of something wrong with you, not because of something we're doing. And that's why it's real nasty that Libra's in the 12th house from Scorpio. Because how do I explain this? Because it's easier to project onto the person who is feeling uncomfortable feelings that make everybody else feel uncomfortable. It's easier to project onto them that they're a problem than it is for you to acknowledge that their discomfort makes you uncomfortable. And that directly ties into the Libra theme of Libra not wanting to feel its own emotional discomfort because at one point in their life it was unsafe to do so. Do you see how all these things kind of tie together? Am I making sense? I feel like it makes more sense in my head than it does to verbalize, but I feel like the gag of the moment whenever planets start entering Scorpio is the fact that Jupiter will be in Cancer and Saturn is in Pisces. So there's this larger theme going on in the background of all this Libra stuff and the Scorpio stuff, where people are having a lot of feelings they're not talking about, potentially a lot of feelings that they don't understand the context of why they feel that way. And instead of speaking directly to the feeling that they have, they will point at someone else and make them the problem. So some examples of that are already happening. I saw someone in the chat talk about COVID. I'm going to read what April said. That reminds me of the people on TikTok saying the lion does not concern themselves. Oh my God, that's such a good example. The lion does not concern themselves with insert long COVID symptoms. I saw one that said the lion does not concern themselves with their ongoing and constant brain fog. The lion does not concern themselves with this chronic cough that hasn't gone away in months. The lion does not concern themselves with executive dysfunction and post exertional malaise. Like literally, and um like yes, I think some of it is K2 and Leo because the lion. There's this idea of like posturing as not having to be concerned, but there's definitely that's literally the dissociating from this feeling, the dismissal of this chronic symptom from this ongoing debilitating virus that everybody keeps huffing but nobody is talking about. I feel like that's an excellent example. Another example is feelings are like hot potatoes getting passed around. Another good example is frogs in a frogs frogs in a boiling pot of water. That whole analogy where because you've been in the pot of water that's been gradually getting hotter over time, you don't feel it getting hotter in the same way that you would if you were not in the water and then you jumped in while it was hot. You know what I mean? Like um you're just a little bit more oblivious to the experience that you're having because you haven't been given context, the full context for what's going on. So what I mean by that is like everyone's feeling dysregulated, yes, because of multiple COVID infections, but also because we are in a time politically where our bodies are being politicized, right? Our bodies are being gaslit and manipulated and coerced into going to work and continuing to labor, despite the exhaustion that everyone feels, despite the stress and distress that everyone feels, and despite the psychological and spiritual warfare that is constantly going on. It's like if you don't have something specific to blame or something, or rather something specific to name as the source of your suffering, then the person in the room who is constantly wailing and whining and crying and crashing out and whatever is going to become the source of your problem because they are having the outward expression of the very thing that you are struggling to find a source to feel. This is exactly how um the Republican Party is able to manipulate so many people by pointing at immigrants and trans people and whoever else as the source of their suffering, because conservatives know that they're suffering. And when I say conservatives, I don't mean conservatives in power. I mean just regular people who vote Republican, right? They know that they're suffering. They know that they're struggling. But to me, Republicans kind of take on more of that pull yourself up by your bootstraps and like impose your will on your body Aries kind of way. Republicans, as in voters, kind of take on the more Aries perspective of saying like, fuck the rules, fuck the establishment, fuck other people, I'm gonna get mine. And they feel exhausted and tired and distressed and violent and enraged and all this other stuff. But instead of blaming the system because they don't want to be seen as victims to the system, they blame marginalized people. And there's, obviously whiteness and patriarchy and everything else that contributes to that. But that's the context that they exist in that they refuse to acknowledge, right, as a source of their suffering. Whereas people on the left also delude themselves in other ways. But a lot of people on the left are more willing to blame the system, but then struggle to see the ways that they also perpetuate the system as individuals sometimes too and take on full responsibility for that. So there's a lot of this people feeling the distress and the intensity of the moment and not knowing how to respond to it because we can't all get on the same page about what policies would alleviate our suffering, which is a way that I think Libra and Cancer could work together, is getting all on the same page. Libra, I would say Scorpio, Libra, and Cancer could all work together by saying, wow, my struggles feel like this, and this is the experience I'm having within my identity. what's the experience that you're having within your identity? And then even though we have differing identities and different feelings and subjective experiences, by us speaking about the common source of our struggle and acknowledging that we're both suffering, that's how we get to creating policies that actually become more broadly applicable instead of these imbalanced power things where we're giving all the power to corporate structures and to other governments, foreign governments, and um, instead, I lost my train of thought. But you get what I'm saying. We could be coming together on our shared struggles and creating policies towards our shared struggles, but instead, we keep getting lost in the sauce of infighting, basically. And by infighting, I mean working class versus ruling class, infighting within the working class, and infighting even within our own identity groups, um, instead of seeing the larger picture. So, yeah. Um, I've been talking about nothing and everything, but I know we're skating around the thing exactly. Like, there's already this elephant in the room thing with Saturn and Pisces just constantly. But then when you add Jupiter, when Jupiter moves into Cancer instead, it's like the thing everyone is avoiding now and talking around, or rather probably not even speaking about, then is your body. But instead of talking about it, like we're doing maybe with Jupiter and Gemini, and struggling to see the context, Jupiter in Cancer with Saturn and Pisces is like seeing people get road rage more often than not and running red lights, and now people are crashing everywhere, but nobody really knows why. All of a sudden there's an upswing in automobile accidents, right? Or we're seeing a lot more people having heart attacks and strokes, but not really being able to make sense of why more people are having heart attacks and strokes, and nobody's really talking about it either. Or seeing more people just things like that. You see evidence in people's bodies, but there's no conversation happening about it. So you can't really make sense of it, and you can't even really center it until um people actually sit down and start talking about it. So I don't know. There's more astrology whenever I talk about where Venus is and where Mars is at any given time through the rest of the year. We'll talk about that as the weeks go on live, but the overall theme is, yeah, one, people finding ways to avoid or to make conversations more palatable so as to not trip up other people's alarms and nervous systems and whatever. And also just straight up like placating and posturing as if everything is okay, concealing the truth of how they actually feel in service of not rocking the boat, whether that's to stay safe or to manipulate other people. So there's that. I'm gonna read the rest of these and I'm gonna pull cards, and that will be all for today, I think. Because I feel like we talked a lot up here and just going to need to let things play out to figure out what that's actually going to be. Definitely lots of projection, yes. As long as Rahu and Ketu are in Aquarius and Leo, so much projection. So much denial everywhere, yes. So the lesson is to check yourself, and where you haven't spoken up before you project feelings on someone else. Absolutely. Yeah, big part. Big part of all of this. I would definitely say checking in with yourself and tuning into your own resentment, especially, um and the source of your passive aggression as it comes up, because it may not make sense to be outright aggressive during this time. I wouldn't recommend it. You will get scapegoated for it, and scapegoating in this era sometimes looks like getting arrested. So if you are an underprivileged group or an oppressed group currently, like, tread lightly. I'm not going to tell anybody that they shouldn't behave in a way that they need to behave to survive. I would just make sure you have safeguards in place, right? That's another way you can be strategic in this time. Safeguards can look like community, safeguards can look like saving money, safeguards can look like um, having a backup plan or a fallout plan or whatever, but like, it's tricky because part of the whole thing is like respectability politics and not breaking rules. Like, that's just the whole Libra of it all. But I do believe, at least when it comes to astrology, that there is a time and a place for breaking rules. And I don't know. So I'm not going to say either or, because I think it depends on the person. But I don't know if now um, is the time to overtly break rules. It might be the time to covertly move in a way that helps you get your needs met. How about that? Cool. Republicans are fine suffering as long as they know other people suffer more. Absolutely that. Yes. Absolutely that. Praying that Violet Affleck's speech about the pandemic is a big context connector for folks. I do think people are getting there. I just think in order to fully accept, like if we're talking about not getting if we're talking about speaking in ways that get past people's emotional defenses, like it is going to be really hard to tell a population that has that needs to believe that they're safe right now that they're not actually safe right now. Like that's there's no easy way to have that conversation and say it in a way that people won't be in denial about it. Um because to have to feel the level of unsafety that we're at all the time and that they've been and the damage that's already been done that can't be undone, like that's a lot. That's a big undertaking. And it's just not that simple. So, doesn't mean you stop talking about it. It just means find more skilled ways to talk about it. I think that's the gist of this, at least the Mercury retrograde in Libra part of this all, and the Mars and Libra of it all, and the Libra of it all is that the point isn't to stop talking, but the point is to be strategic about how you speak so that it actually has the impact that you want it to have versus calling a spade a spade. Sometimes calling a spade is going to make people tune out, and that's not the impact that we want to have, right? If you have people you can do that with, though, by all means. Okay. Quick card pull, mostly just to pull cards because I haven't in a while, and to potentially get more context for anything that I've just said. Even though I really could stop right now. I'll just do 2 cards instead. It's so absurd because this is the time to connect the dots that we're not safe politically. Look where we're at. I know. I would agree. Got to find effective ways to do so without triggering people's defensiveness. Contrary to popular belief, I think Libra is a very defensive sign. It may not be physically defensive, but it is absolutely a defense attorney. You feel me? It is a defense attorney, and sometimes it's a prosecutor, child. But instead of decking you in your jaw, they were going to use words, right? Words and logical arguments and things like that. All right. To my elevated and healed ancestors and spirits, we give thanks for being able to gather in this way and to discuss these topics together and get insight into the future and into the present moment. We're just calling you for any insight, guidance, tips for how to navigate really the rest of the year, I would say, but especially this Mercury retrograde and its little dance that it's doing with Mars in both Libra and Scorpio. How can we best use this energy moving forward? And yeah, how can we best work with this energy moving forward? I'll leave it at that. We give thanks. We give thanks. Ashe. Amen. Ah. I think the UN stuff is very interesting regarding the Libra of it all that you just mentioned. Absolutely. And we do have midterms coming up, right? Is that this year or next year? All right. Card on the bottom of the deck is who we got here? Ace of Knives. Love to see a knife when Mars is in an air sign. Never fails. And then our card pull 10 of Knives. Well. Lots of knives. So the air is certainly in the room with us. So card on the bottom for the subject, card on the top for the solution or for the tip. So that's interesting. So let's think about this. Ace of Knives. This is Ace of Knives is Ace of Swords. So we are working with air. We are working with the mind, the intellect, and language, rational thinking and behavior. And Ace of Knives is traditionally about the truth. It's about cutting through the bullshit. It is actually about calling a spade and telling the truth. Sometimes I think it's also about being decisive, and it's maybe opportunities that respond to truth or opportunities that are created through being honest. But honesty, it's like both honesty in terms of telling the truth, but it's also being honest with yourself, right? And what happens when you speak up. So I would say the context here is saying that there is an opportunity to speak. There's an opportunity to tell the truth. There's an opportunity to be honest. However, when we look at our strategy, whatever it is, we have 10 of knives. So it's kind of a interesting juxtaposition here. As you can see, this person is impaled with several different knives and sharp objects. And usually 10 of knives is that beating a dead horse. To me, it's like beating a dead horse, right? Or the saying of beating a dead horse where you've said all that you can say sometimes. Or a lot of times with 10 of knives, you've thought and ruminated over something so much that now you're frozen or you've hit rock bottom or there's just nothing left to do, think, or say about it. Um, I think 10 of knives, I think both ace of knives and 10 of knives in the context of Mars and Mercury in Libra makes sense where there's for Mars and Libra, Mars and Libra people that I've known, there is often like a freeze response that happens when you feel out of control of a situation or when you've been caught or when you are um, in a situation where big feelings are trying to come up. And since you have never felt the freedom to express those big feelings, they end up just kind of, yeah, creating this like freeze response where your nervous system is actually so overwhelmed that the the more rational speaking thinking justifying part of your brain goes offline and you just kind of don't know what to think, do, or say. So I kind of see 10 of knives as that right now. um but the benefit of 10 of knives is that like you've exhausted all of the ways that what am I trying to say here? If the context is telling the truth with the ace of knives, then 10 of knives would imply to me that you've maybe already said all that you could say in the way that you've been saying it. Or actually, I take that back. I think in this case, let me sit. Okay, two things just came up. One of them is the truth will set you free. And then the other one with 10 of knives is like turning that it's like ruminating as a way of self-harm almost. Like all of these knives, I don't know, what's coming to me in this particular moment is all of these knives and that freeze response in a way is because instead of expressing, right, getting things out, you've turned them inwards. So all of those ruminations, all of the consideration for everyone else, there's like some level of like of self-deprecation or like the dismissal or whatever reasons that you decide not to speak out. That thing that you need to say out loud turns around and it hits you instead, and it immobilizes you because now you're carrying so many of these resentments, you're carrying so many of these fears and concerns about the outcome or just negative thoughts about yourself and why you don't deserve to take up space in the world, that now you have all these knives in you and ain't no knives in them. So how can you use then your tongue as a weapon as needed? Yes. But there's just something here about owning your truth, I think. Owning your truth out loud and speaking up for your side of things in a way that is skillful and deliberate instead of turning it in on yourself. Maybe that's what it is actually. Because it wouldn't make sense to me for this to say that you've said all you can say, so stop talking. That's not the point. I think the point is you're keeping a lot of things in and it's hurting you and it's immobilizing you and it is making you think less of yourself and making you feel unworthy of taking up space in the world and in your relationships. And your feelings are like consuming you. Your thoughts are consuming you if we're being literal about the cards, but if we're speaking in context of what I was just saying, like your fear of being perceived as dysregulated is only making you further internalize being dysregulated. You know what I mean? That energy needs to move out. And the benefit of telling the truth is that instead of you having to hold all of these knives in your back, um, somebody else has to deal with those knives now. Somebody else needs to take ownership of how they've made you feel. Someone else needs to be accountable for how they've made you feel. And I do think that that is part of the Libra and Scorpio relationship. Like I do think for Scorpio, sometimes we can overly, sometimes we can lean too much into our wounds and be too, again, self-centric in the way that all water signs do. We can be too self-centric about the pain that we feel, so much so that we don't acknowledge how we're making someone else feel. Or not even that we don't acknowledge how we're making someone else feel, but that we stop, um, we lose our ability to empathize with other people's pain as well. Not as a way to necessarily forgive them, but to just like see people for who they are. You know what I mean? Like maybe this is off topic, maybe it's not, but when I think about idealizing somebody versus villainizing somebody, they're both two ends of the same coin, two sides of the same coin where you're not seeing someone for who they actually are, for what they actually are. Or you're not seeing the thing that they did for what it actually is. You're either making too many excuses for them or you're not really like you're either making too many excuses for them and making yourself the problem, or you are making them the problem and not seeing the ways that you contribute to your own demise at times, right? So they're like you take both in both directions and both directions can be immobilizing, but there's somewhere in between where you are seeing the reality of yourself and the reality of them, the truth of yourself and how you feel, and the truth of them and what they've done or how they feel, and responding to that instead of whatever stories you've made up in your mind or whatever rationale that you've come up with or whatever it is that you are imposing into the situation to make yourself be okay with some shit that you're not okay with. So I think that's what it is. Instead of turning all of that in on yourself and keeping it in and allowing it to weigh you down and immobilize you and keep you in that freeze state, find a way to tell the truth. Find a way. And that's what I have to say about that. Sounds like it's time to create. Yes. Great time for poetry, great time for art, great time for writing, great time for whatever. Create something. Express yourself in creative ways and get the truth out somehow. I love cards. I missed it. I haven't pulled cards in weeks. Ten of Knives, feeling that freeze. There's a conversation that's been ongoing since Mars retrograde earlier this year that didn't end right. I wanted to continue it, but I'll have to wait for my safety. Yep, I get overwhelmed expressing things and overthinking. Well, I can make my peace with the people that believe me in my experience. And look, and I think on this point of creating, like, yeah, I got to get back to my notebook. Like, yeah, even if all you do is journal, that's still getting it out and telling the truth somehow, even if you're not saying it directly to the people who need to hear it just yet. I do think the time for that will come because, after Libra and Scorpio comes Sagittarius, and then everybody's yelling. And I think Jupiter will be back in Gemini at some point during all that. So there will be plenty of time for yelling at people. But in the meantime, get it off your chest somehow in a strategic way. And then we will reconvene next week or the week after when I have more insight about whatever's going on. So cool. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. Oh, another banger. I think there's also coming to terms with trying to speak your truth to someone incapable of seeing you. That's actually very relevant to that spread, I think. Potentially more relevant, actually. Coming to terms with trying to speak your truth to someone incapable of seeing you, because that ties in a lot of elements of the sky right now, too. Yeah, I don't know. Take today's conversation with a grain of salt, or take from it what you need, what makes sense for you, and then as things start to unfold, we will reconstruct the story along the way. But if any of this ends up being useful to you, please let me know. You can DM me, you can email me, you can respond to this video at whatever point that you're seeing it. Just let me know what's going on, because I always feel like wandering around in the dark a little bit whenever we're talking about planets just moving into a sign and things that are to come. I'm like, I don't know. This is kind of my guess. But trying to account for every planet and sign in the sky at the same time it's a lot sometimes for me. So anyway, thank y'all so much. I hope y'all have a wonderful Saturday. I hope your week gets off to a great start. And yeah, Mercury square Jupiter on October 1st, then Mercury in Libra on October 2nd. So hang in there, guys. Okay, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, book a reading with me, and join my Patreon. Links are in the description of this video if you need them. See you later. Bye.